It's so scary to show up. It feels dangerous to be seen. It's terrifying. But it is not as scary, dangerous, or terrifying as getting to the end of our lives and thinking, what if I would have shown up? What would have been different?
What are your thoughts on being vulnerable? Do you see it as a sign of weakness? Are you scared of being vulnerable in other people? I would say there's not much more frightening than exposing our thoughts and ideas to the world. Yet if we refuse to be vulnerable and succumb to the fear that we feel around criticism, then we will always remain powerless. And in a world that now requires us to step forward and share our truth, share our authentic voice. As we continue this series in uncovering the layers of personal mastery, the next profound teacher is Brené Brown. And she says, if you're not failing, then you're really not showing up. Now, personal mastery requires a multidimensional approach from the energetic, the emotional, the physical, the spiritual, and the mindset levels. With that awareness, today we're going to look at the emotional nature and how we show up and how we relate to others. So in today's video, you're going to learn how being vulnerable leads to freedom. You're going to learn where we've covered so far within the individual mastery and how that relates to our relationships. You're going to learn why these practices give us our power back. And you're going to learn 3 powerful strategies to help you manage the emotional risk of showing up. If you're new to my videos, please click and subscribe to this channel and click the bell so you'll be notified each and every week when I release new content. So when you've done that, let's dive straight into this fascinating topic with Brené Brown. I'm Richard Husseini, coach, speaker, and here to support you along your path to personal mastery. And personal mastery is really about understanding our thoughts, feelings, and actions. And it's the journey of inner work for outer action. And much of that requires us to be vulnerable. So on to part 1 of today's video, how being vulnerable leads to freedom. And simply put, vulnerability is uncertainty, it's risk, and it's emotional exposure. And it's that feeling we get when we step out of our comfort zone and we begin to loosen the control that we perceive that we have in life. And if we don't develop our ability to lean into the inevitable discomfort that comes with being vulnerable, it just limits the fullness of our experiences that are wrought with uncertainty, such as love, belonging, trust, and creativity, to name a few. So feeling the fear and still showing up is a step we all need to take if we want to be authentic in this world. As Brené Brown would say, we need to embrace stepping into the arena.
I want to talk very specifically about the arena. This is where we sweat. How many of you know this feeling by just looking at the picture? Yeah, show of hands. How many of you know this feeling? So this is what we do down here. Like, I don't know what you do down here, but what I set up camp down here. I like string up twinkle lights, I order takeout food. I live down here sometimes just dreaming about the day that I come up and how awesome it's going to be. But I stay down here a lot. And here's what we do. The arena's right there. You can see it. The light's there. And the fear is this. I'm scared. A lot of self-doubt, comparison, anxiety, uncertainty. And so what do most people do when they're walking into the arena and those things are going to greet them up top? What do? You armor up, right? This is where I would imagine the old days that they got all their stuff on. But God, that stuff is heavy and that stuff is suffocating. And the problem is when you armor up against vulnerability, you shut yourself off. And I've said this to audiences before, but I have never said it to an audience where it is more true than today, this second. When you armor up in this hallway, you shut yourself off from everything that you do and that you love. Because vulnerability is certainly a part of fear and self-doubt and grief and uncertainty and shame, but it's also the birthplace of these. It's the birthplace of love, of belonging, of joy, trust, empathy, creativity, and innovation. Without vulnerability, you cannot create. So what I think you're asked to do as a creative on a daily basis is walk through this hall, get to the top of the stairs, and get naked. Of course. Get naked. Get really real. Put yourself out there and walk out there so people can see you and see what you've made and see what you're doing.
Really being vulnerable is about showing up and being seen. And it's tough to do that when we have that expectation, or we're trying to people please. We're just worried about what people will think or what people will say. And one of the things that have kind of really helped me turn this around in my own life anyway, has been the awareness that when I have, in the past, when I've been worried about what people think, I'm hustling for worthiness. I'm trying to get worthiness or validation from other people, rather than developing that worthiness and validation from myself, within myself. Now, that's a practice, of course, but to be able to spot that when you're kind of doing it, when you're in the throes of that self-talk about looking for worthiness, that to me has been a powerful shift. And that check of that self-worth, if we are gaining self-worth from what other people think and what other people feel of us, that's just a very risky place to be real. It's a very, very difficult place to be real. But these fears, these conversations, that internal narrative that we all have, it's not individual to you, it's not individual to me. Like, we all experience that. Anything worth sharing is going to have that element of fear. What if it's not good enough? It's all self-talk, isn't it? So what if we could reframe that? What if we could just expect criticism?
This is who I want to be. I want to create. I want to make things that didn't exist before I touched them. I want to show up and be seen in my work and in my life. And if you're going to show up and be seen, there is only one guarantee, and that is you will get your ass kicked. That is the guarantee. That's the only certainty you have. If you're going to go in the arena and spend any time in there whatsoever, especially if you've committed to creating in your life, you will get your ass kicked. So you have to decide at that moment, I think for all of us, if courage is a value that we hold, this is a consequence. You can't avoid it.
So if courage is a value you hold, criticism is just part of it. We just can't avoid it. And so being clear with your values within life is crucial. You haven't got to have, haven't got a long list of values. Values, you know your values now, even if you haven't practiced writing them out and just being clear on them. But it's certainly, once you become clear on those values you want to embody and values you respect in other people, this does begin to start to shift. This video, for example, the videos I put out into public on this channel right now, it's my authentic voice and sharing what I've learnt in my experiences of life from working in professional sport and also my own life story. Some people don't agree with it. Some people, comment negatively, but that's just part of it. It's worth, for me, the experiences I've been through are worth sharing because I believe and I know that they help some people. Even if it helps one person, that to me is worth it. And that's just an experience from my own personal life. And so we can build our resilience to being vulnerable. And the way to do that is to create space for the critics, not to wish they weren't there, but to expect them and to hold a place for them.
The third thing, which really set me free, and I think Steve, my husband, would argue has made me somewhat dangerous, is kind of a new philosophy about criticism, which is this. If you're not in the arena also getting your ass kicked, I'm not interested in your feedback. Period. That's it. If you have constructive information, feedback to give me, I want it. And I'm an academic. I'm hardwired for wrestling around with stuff like that. If you say, hey, you forgot all this literature, or hey, you should have done this, or terrible sentence construction over here, like, let's do it. I love that. But if you're in the cheap seats, not putting yourself on the line, and just talking about how I could do it better, I'm in no way interested in your feedback.
I think that clarity on, one, who is giving you criticism? Are these people showing up in their life? Are they being vulnerable themselves? Because if they're not, and as Brené Brown said, if they're in the cheap seats, it's not worth listening to them. They have nothing to offer you. They have nothing to offer of credible criticism because haven't got any skin in the game. And so that is a powerful message. And anyone that is putting themselves out there and being vulnerable is going to be, maybe not everyone, but there's going to be an element of understanding. We all make mistakes. We all, in the way we create our ideas and create our work and create our voice, we are navigating a new space. And so to do that, it's a continual refinement. I can only say from my experience, but it's a continual refinement. There's an idea and it catches in the center, doesn't it? And then when you begin to share that, it's just refined. It's small changes over time. And so when you're getting feedback from people who are doing the same thing, there's an understanding, normally an understanding. And so defining, are these people in the game? Have they got anything worth to say? Or are these people just firing off shots from the cheap sheets, as Brené Brown said again, and are just not doing it themselves? It's easy to be an armchair critic, isn't it? But when you're actually in the arena yourself, there's an understanding. Real personal growth comes from realizing your excellence despite your flaws. And that is a healthy strive. And there's a big difference between that healthy strive and trying to be perfect. Perfectionism is about believing that if we do things perfectly, we'll minimize the amount of pain that comes from blame, judgment, or shame. But that's not about real personal growth. It's about fear and it's about avoidance. The fear of making mistakes, of judgment, of doing things wrong keeps us outside of the arena. It keeps us limited because we're not expressing our true self. Certainly in my old work with professional athletes, Olympic athletes, it's impossible to get to extraordinary levels of achievement without making mistakes, because the cliche is, failures are learnings, but there's such truth to that. As long as you can do that in a constructive way, we have to embrace that. It's just part of the beautiful refinement of living life. So on to part 2 of today's video, moving from individual to relational mastery. The essence of personal mastery is about developing awareness of our thoughts, feelings, and actions. Ultimately, this allows us to perceive life through more open perspectives. In the previous videos in this series so far, we've looked at individual tools, and I'm just going to cover those briefly just to give you an overlay if you haven't watched any of those. And in the first video, we looked at the emotional levels, and we featured Dr. Gabor Mate. And so just to briefly go through this, the symptom of emotional triggers were victimhood, outburst, often reliving the past, strong emotional charge, rage, an explosion of emotion at something that, when you look back in hindsight, is particularly small. The cause of that is often unresolved childhood event. The technique that we featured was compassionate inquiry, and Dr. Gabor Mate calls that the archaeology of the mind, because the work is about softly uncovering the explosive nature, like looking below the surface of the reaction of rage, for example, and uncovering what's underneath that. And an example we used was unworthiness. So there was a sense of unworthiness, there was a sense of not being cared for, which stemmed back from the past. And so that's what created the symptom of rage. It was very much unresolved. The second video we looked at was looking at the energetic levels, and that was with Dr. John Amaral. And so the symptom of how that shows up is there was a sense of something missing, and often a physical discomfort because of the way the energetic layers and the acoustic and electromagnetic levels of this get stuck within the body. The cause is very often repressed emotions and an inability to express fully. The technique that we looked at was the energy flow method, and that was very simply connecting with the body using breath work, expressing sound and movement. The third video was looking at the more physical levels, and that was with Lisa Feldman Barrett. And so a symptom of that would be stuck in the mental stories, unable to get perspective, with the understanding that the brain is a predictor machine and it's constantly scanning the environment and scanning the body to make sense of the feelings within our body. And so the cause of that was a poor body budget debt, so how well we manage our energy. And it was also disconnected from the physical body. And the technique or term used was interoception, the internal awareness of or internal perspective. And the work with that is about developing awareness within the body in real time and also balancing the body budget. So they're the three first videos, and the last one, most recent one, was the spiritual levels. And that was with Jamie Wheal. And that was looking at a loss of meaning and inspiration in life. That was the symptom of how this shows up. The cause of that is often life overwhelm or unresolved trauma. And then the technique was to use peak states. And then the work is about the wise and intentional use of accessing peak states, and not just accessing them, but then integrating the lessons and knowledge and clarity that's gained from these places. And so looking at that overview, very brief overview, is that is an individual focus. They are prompts and tools that we can use to look at ourselves in the moment, to begin to influence the way we think, the way we feel, and the way we act. So today's video is really about kind of expand that out and looking at more the relational aspects of how we relate to other people and what we can do to improve the quality of our relationships. So once we've begun to understand and bring awareness to our inner world when we're alone, it's time to bring that out into the real world and how we relate to other people. And so this means developing an awareness to see the best in people, to understand that people are on their own journey, and also to be able to set our own clear boundaries.
It was probably one of the findings from my research that I had this stack of data probably 12 years ago, and we laughingly called it the compassion smackdown. It was the stack of data, the most compassionate people that we had interviewed over this first initial 8-year period when I started my research. And we couldn't figure out what they had in common. We couldn't, what is it? And I thought my hypothesis was spirituality. I think compassionate people share in common a strong spiritual belief, but it wasn't. And I mean, I'm talking monks that we had interviewed, really compassionate people that found God in everyone, people that connected to everyone. And you know what they had in common? One variable.
I don't know.
Boundaries of steel. They were incredibly boundaried people. And so that was confusing to me. So we went back and did what we call selective coding. We went back and said, here's what I'm finding. Does that resonate with you as one of our compassionate people? And they said, I would have not languaged it that way, but yes, I'm very clear about what's okay and what's not okay. I'm very clear on boundaries. I don't subject myself to the abuse of other people. I'm like, but you're compassionate. And they're like, yeah, I'm compassionate because I don't subject myself to the abuse of other people.
All we have the power to do is to do work on ourselves. We cannot change anyone else. As Ram Dass says, all I can do for you is work on myself. All you can do for me is work on yourself. And so when people are in our life mistreating us or in whatever way that is, it's for us to set clear boundaries. It's up to us to take ourselves out the environment. And that's a really important skill when it comes to personal mastery, but it doesn't mean it's easy.
You know, it's interesting because when I was in my MSW, I did a lot of domestic violence, sexual assault work. And the people, the women who believed that their husbands or partners were doing the best they could were the ones who left and got their children out.
Wow, because they know there's no, yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And they didn't say, horrible sack of shit. They said, I love him. He's broken right now, and he's doing the best he can, and I'm not safe.
If we don't set boundaries, we are the ones creating more pain in our life. And the idea that we can still love, we can still care for someone, and in fact, that's an important part to it. We can still have love, compassion, feelings, kindness towards something, and still remove ourselves from that situation, because that is the right thing to do, because we're on different parts of our path.
Boundaries are very simply, here's what's okay and here's what's not okay. When you avoid conflict to make peace with other people, you start a war within.
So if part of our inner work is about taking ourselves away from people that are hurting us, it's then up to us how we choose to see people. And inevitably, everyone is doing their best.
It's very hard to be compassionate toward people when they're hurting us. And people hold on to believing, for me, it was really interesting because I was like, hell no, people are not doing the best they can. And if that's your best, you suck. And it's not best enough for me. And this was in the middle of it, talking about a God moment. So I'm in the back of the car, I'll never forget, with another couple. Steve and the husband were in the front, and I was riding the back with my girlfriend, and we were going to see John Mayer at the Woodlands. And I was like, hey, I'm doing this interesting research right now. Do you think people are doing the best they can? She goes, hell no, people are so fucking lazy. And I was like, I was like, oh, this is why we're good friends. I'm like, they are, aren't they? She goes, yeah. Like, and we both had young kids at the time. She's, let me give you an example. She's like, what about the people that have kids and they stop breastfeeding before a year or a year and a half? Like, what about those people? She's like, oh, I can't breastfeed anymore. I've got an infection, or I'm going back to work and I don't like pumping. And all of a sudden, I'm like, oh my God, that's me. Like, I quit breastfeeding after like 5 months because I had to go back to work and pumping was just not working and I just didn't do it. So I'm like, yeah, those people are awful. And she goes, yeah, like, why did you have kids if you weren't willing to do that? That was her take. And I was like, and all I wanted to say was, you don't know me. Like, you don't. And then here's what I wanted to say. I was fucking doing the best I could.
Wow.
And then toward the end of that research, yeah, there were a lot of great stories about people we interviewed during that. I asked Steve, my husband, do you think people are doing the best they can? And he said, I don't know, I have to think about it for a little bit. And I said, I want your help. And he's like, okay, let me think about it. And he came back 10, 15 minutes later, and he said, I've thought about it. And he said, I have no idea. But what I do know is my life is better when I assume they are.
On to part 3 of today's video. Why these practices give us our power back. Being bound by fear leaves us separate, powerless and limited. Yet the institutions that govern our environments and society are all working towards that aim.
Okay, you only have to do a couple of things. You have to, 1, make sure that you exacerbate people's fear and uncertainty, and then deliver an enemy that they could blame for their fear and uncertainty. If you can do those things, you can rule the world. If you can weaponize vulnerability, fear and uncertainty, get people really divided and rattled, and then deliver on a golden platter an enemy that they can blame for their pain, you can do anything.
To me, that's really powerful to understand and to listen to. The principles of power and establishment are twofold. So the first one is to exacerbate people's fear and uncertainty. And the second one is to deliver an enemy that can be blamed. Now, this video was recorded in 2019, not this one you're watching right now, but the clips that I'm showing you. And right now, this video that I'm recording is in 2021. And so you just have to look around okay, so number 1 was exacerbate people's fear and uncertainty. So there is fear and uncertainty on a global level right now. And then the second one, deliver an enemy that can be blamed. So it could be what's causing the pandemic. And so there's a huge, again, this is a very hot topic, I suppose, but to look into this in a little bit more detail with what's the mainstream narrative that's being said, and are there any other alternative narratives that maybe offer an insight into maybe something else that's going on. And so this formula is not new, it's been around for a long time now, and it especially got heightened after 9/11.
I think what we're in the middle of right now, if I had to take my best because I started my research 6 months before 9/11. So I have really been on the ground watching the world change people and watching people change the world. Like I watched what 9/11 did, not only to this country, but just globally, and I've never seen people, A, in so much fear, and B, so sick and tired of being afraid. So something's going to happen.
And it's really important to remember that the individual, you and I, are solely responsible for either staying in fear or stepping out of fear. And this short series, this video today and the other videos in this series have all looked at ways of stepping out of fear and into empowerment. On to the final part of today's video, part 4. 3 strategies to manage the emotional risk of showing up. The first thing we really need to do is figure out what's keeping us out of the arena, what's stopping us showing up. Specifically, what is the fear we're feeling? What is that fear? Is it worried what people think? Is it criticism? Is it not being perceived as good enough? And the next question is, where and why do I want to be braver? What's the cause? What's the deep, heart-centered feeling of what is the message that wants to come out? Why and where is that coming from? The next question we need to ask is, how are we keeping ourselves not being vulnerable? How are we stopping ourselves being vulnerable? Is it things like trying to be perfect? Is it we're trying to maintain control, we're holding on too tight? You know, that's where I started with all of this, the uncovering of the identities that I was trying to protect, far outdated identities of what I was trying to, you know, who I was trying to be for other people rather than just showing up as who I am, including my flaws. So the first strategy I'm going to talk about is about getting clear with values. And this is what has helped me considerably stepping into being vulnerable. Because I used to live a life where I was trying to fit in, I was trying to get validation from other people. I was not honest with myself, let alone with other people. And so my values of what I did value in life were not synced with how I was acting in the world. And so when I began to look at that and understand that and then start to be clear with values that I found important and looked to in other people, and then start to live myself, my life opened up, and the confidence to be vulnerable grew exponentially, to be able to share what I believe in, because that is more important than trying to please everyone. And again, use this example again, these videos that I do, the work I do now is not going to be liked by everyone, and that's okay. That's all right. We need to have a difference of opinion and need to accept that. I want to kind of link that into a real life example and kind of where values are important when we feel guilt. And so there's two types of guilt. There's a justified guilt and an unjustified guilt. An unjustified guilt would be, for example, my addiction used to be with exercise. So I used to train ridiculous amount. I used to compare myself to the Olympic athletes I work with. Just a pointless experience because I was trying to get external validation. I was trying to make up for things, my unworthiness that I felt inside. I was trying to, get validation from other people. And so every time I didn't exercise or took a day off, I would feel this guilt. I would feel let down. I would just let myself down, and I was being lazy or whatever the terms I was using. But the reason that's an unjustified guilt was because at my core values, I valued recovery. I valued looking after yourself. And so that unjustified guilt was fueling this perpetual behavior that I couldn't see at the time. And when you do with that, how you disconnect that is connecting with your values, connecting with the internal feelings. So I felt guilty for not training, for example. I would then connect that. Why do I feel guilty? Because I'm taking a day off. Do I value recovery? Yes. Well, that's what I do today because that's what I need. And it's going to be uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable to start with when I was changing my behaviors, as any behavior is hard to change. But the more I did that, the more I became in tune with my values. So that's an example of an unjustified guilt. A justified guilt is where you go against your values. And so, if, for example, someone asked you for help and you said, sorry, I can't do it, I'm out of town, I can't do it. Yet you were just sitting at home, binge watching Netflix. That's a justified guilt that you'd feel if you said that, because you're going against your core value of being truthful, if that's a value that you hold clear to yourself. And so a way of disconnecting that is, one, to own up. Sorry, I made that story up. I want to make it up to you. How can I make it up to you? And then you create that connection, you open up, you're honest, and then you recommit to helping that person. Just to kind of land getting clarity on values. I hope that offers some insight into the value of being clear with your values. The second strategy, it might sound obvious, but to have someone that you can trust. Have someone that will hold you despite the criticism, despite when you get things wrong, and to be open and honest. Yeah, that didn't work out well, but it doesn't matter. What have you learned from it? Again, this is one of the key lessons I've taken from my work in Olympic sport, and one of the lessons I'm trying to get out there to as many people as possible. You cannot refine, you cannot grow without understanding and without making errors. That I see it like a pathway. And so we all want to go perfectly down the straight line path, but we can't. We need to know where the edges are, and we need to cross the edges sometimes. And so to be comfortable with that, and to have someone nearest and dearest to you, it hasn't got to be intimate, it hasn't got to be a partner. Ideally it is, because they're your partner in life, that you can be honest with, and they can be honest with you, and they can still hold you. They can still be there for you. They can still be an avenue of trust. And I hope that is, like I said, it's more very, very obvious one, but to improve that relationship. Now, one area that ties into is about feedback. Getting feedback in a professional setting would be my experience with professional feedback in where I used to work, but also in the training I do now in corporate environments, is that feedback is so limited. It might be done at best quarterly. It might be done, probably more than most people, is done on an annual basis, which means it's not relevant. It can't be acted upon in the moment. And so developing a relationship with a colleague who can give you open, honest feedback in a caring and kind way. Because when you open yourself for feedback, that's being vulnerable, isn't it? And so to create that relationship there where, okay, I would like to hear what you think and please be honest. Because often if that connection is not made, people will say what they think you want to hear rather than being clear, precise and constructive with their feedback. That also works very, very well in intimate relationships, whether that's with your partner, whether that's with children if you have children, whether that's with friends. How do you find this friendship? How can this be improved for you? Are you happy in this friendship? What do you need from me as a friend? And to open the dialogue where it's uncomfortable in the moment, but you're creating stronger bonds and stronger relationships. Okay, on to the third and final strategy, and it's about feeling the fear and connecting to mortal stakes. And I say this, and this has been my mission really since losing my mother to cancer, seeing the death process and living through the grief, as well as reflecting on my career and the people I work with and the sports I work with and the environments I worked in. And particularly it was action sport athletes, so acrobatic, divers, snowboarders, skiers, people who fly for a living. It's the awareness that, something that was very, very alien to me, but to see people living this, of course they wanted to win, but the real adversary for them was fear, and how inspiring that was for me. And they are some of the people who are the most free-spirited in life that I've ever met. And one of the reasons for that is because they have a connection to, one, the risks of what may happen, and to get to world-class level, they have hurt themselves multiple times. They have the inspiration to keep coming back despite the injuries that they've had. And finally, they are connected to the mortality. Now, the risk of what they do is serious injury at least, but there are cases where action sport athletes have died. And so that connection to the mortality, to the finite, the transient relationship we have to all of life, our connection to our houses and our cars and our material goods is transient. We will leave them at some point. And so to embody that, to practice 5 minutes a day of thinking about your own mortality. That's not morbid. It's not, it might be strange to start with. But in my experience of seeing death from my parents, both of them have died in front of me, has expanded my life. I am less fearful. I open up to opportunities. And that means to me that it's not worth not being vulnerable. It's not worth saying how I feel in terms of for the good of all. And so to use a practice of thinking about mortality. And if you need guidance, then you could seek any esoteric tradition that's going to serve you well. But to practice that on a daily basis, just, you could be sitting on a bench in a park, just having a few moments of like, wow, this is a transient moment. This is not going to be here forever. What is going on here? Maybe questions that are beyond this video, but to develop that practice. So to finish up this video, there is great power in embracing your vulnerability. It's about letting go. It's about letting go of failed relationships. It's about letting go of mistakes. It's about letting go of perceived failures. Until you let go and be in the present, happiness is just a myth, because you're either in the past or in the future. You're not in the present moment right now. And so the practice of being vulnerable brings us into that moment. It brings us into that moment despite feeling fear. And I mentioned it briefly, but one of the elements to managing fear is about using your breath. We can use our breath to manage our state. And if you're new to that, and this fits into stage 1 of our pathway to personal mastery, then you can download our free guide and just follow the link below. It's called the 4 Simple Steps to Self-Care, and you'll learn how to use movement to ease chronic pain. You'll learn how to change your nutrition for better health. You'll learn how to shift your mindset into more of a growth success mindset. You'll learn how to get the best night's sleep you've had in ages. And you'll learn some comprehensive breath strategies to help you become more resilient in the moment so you can manage your state. So like I said, follow the instructions, follow the link, and you can download it straight away. It's free for you to use now. Thank you so much for joining on today's video. You can find the other videos as well below that have been mentioned today. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you again on another episode.